Welcome everyone to the news with goldsilverbitcoin.com. My name is Justin O'Connell. Let's dive right in. Our first story we're covering today, U.S. grocery prices increased the most since 1974. Reads that the Labor Department reported Tuesday that prices U.S. consumers paid for groceries increased 2.6% in April, marking the largest one-month increase since February 1974. As the price of meats went up 4.3%, fruit and vegetable prices climbed 1.5%. And cereal and baker products went up 2.9%. U.S. prices in general fell 0.8% for their largest one-month drop since 2008. To quote Peter Bukvar, who's the chief investment officer at Bleakley Advisory Group, quote, food price gains were robust as we know there are empty shelves out there. Demand we know in most areas of the economy has collapsed and prices are falling in response. Not including the volatile food and energy components, the so-called CPI, Consumer Price Index, dropped 0.4%, its largest decline ever through records kept since 1957. Quote, in areas where demand has hung in, like food at home services, we have inflation because the supply side has been damaged, whether directly via infected facilities, though there have not been any deaths that I know of in these infected facilities, and I believe a lot of the cases have been asymptomatic, or because of the higher cost of finding freight capacity. Now, good news is that people are turning to their local farmers, and this is something that we all should be doing. There's no excuse to be shopping at transnational corporations, even if you're saving a little bit of money. Go to your local farmers market, go to your local farmer and negotiate. Maybe tell them the situation you're in. Buy in bulk. Don't buy 3 avocados, buy 15 avocados, and maybe you can get prices that are competitive with these big box stores who, while being allowed to stay open, are getting bailouts because we live in a elitist system where elites run the system and benefit from crises where Main Street essentially has to hide in their homes. Reports are stating that some people are turning to farmers for their food. The Bleakley family farm has been operating in Oklahoma for decades, and they are seeing the most business ever, while adding that many people are growing their own plants to save on groceries. The farm also says that they can barely keep their meat on the shelves. It's really important that we shop at our local butchers, at our local farms. Stop shopping at transnational corporations. And if you have to buy a pair of Levi's, for instance, do it through an app like Lolly. Lolly is an app that allows you to make purchases and earn like 1 to 2% back in Bitcoin. Bitcoin's a deflationary currency, and that is one asset which could shelter people from an inflationary storm, as the Federal Reserve prints between $8 and $10 trillion to stave off the crises began not from the coronavirus, but from the response to the coronavirus, otherwise known as, in IMF terms, the Great Lockdown. Everyone keeps calling this a quarantine. I think quarantines are for the sick. When you lock down an entire society, when you quarantine an entire planet, that is a lockdown. That is a political technique now that is in the toolbox of bureaucrats and elites. But keeping my cool, our next story is called World Bank says that we need redistributive actions to smooth the shock of these lockdowns. The World Bank Group has been hands-on in the response to the COVID-19 crisis, stating that its primary concern in poor economies is to ensure homes and hospitals have power and water, that waste is properly disposed, and food is available and affordable. In other words, that they're willing to give loans with strings attached to poor countries in order to stave off these crises in exchange for the implementation of certain terms. Like historically, this has been known as economic medicine, IMF's economic medicine, or austerity. So quoting 2 authors at the World Bank blog, quote, right now the goal cannot be to stimulate demand and increase economic activity before the virus is under control. Instead, we need redistributive actions to smooth the shock. A plane is flying over. You might be wondering, why is this guy doing a YouTube video on his tiny channel underneath a flight path? Well, it's simple. I just don't know how much longer I'll be able to sit in a park. So I'm going to take advantage of it while I can. The authors also write that measures may also be required to maintain access to food, shelter, or other basic needs, ranging from delaying rent or mortgage payments to delivery of school lunches. They add, quote, in many low and middle income countries, support from multilateral development banks and the IMF will be critical, because how else will we implement our preferred austerity measures in these countries if they don't take our loans? And of course, these countries, if they don't take a loan, face collapse because they don't have social security nets. They don't have savings. Even after COVID-19 health crisis fades, quote, many households will have depleted savings or large debt and will need to save more and consume less. The authors view stimulus as a solution for a financial and economic recovery, so that means the devaluation of the money of the world. Quote, depending on the context, these may include tax cuts and reforms. So tax cuts and reforms, austerity measures, economic medicine. This is the same or a continuation of the same theme that we've seen the World Bank and IMF implement in poor countries for 50 years, I think, if not more. Further measures might include cash transfers and subsidies and higher spending in specific sectors or projects. These actions will have long-lasting effects on the economic system. The authors call for thinking ahead on the part of policymakers, stating that focus on short-term needs should keep longer-term goals in mind. Whose longer-term goals, though? That would be the World Bank, and that would be some of these global institutions. One main goal is the decarbonization of the world economy and the long-term benefits it brings. So decarbonization of the economy. Let's dissect this. Now, it sounds great. Okay, so maybe we have wrought some damage on the planet. We maybe aren't the most efficient society, but the same companies that have, for the most part, polluted the earth are going to be the ones that are now bringing in the solution. The historic petroleum companies are going to now be the guardians and gatekeepers of these new green technologies. Quote, our choices on stimulus packages will affect our ability to achieve this objective, creating risks but also opportunities, according to the authors. For instance, the tax reform component of stimulus packages could create new tax rate for fuel, energy, or carbon, and different incentives to reduce carbon emissions. The, quote, unique nature of this crisis may make the building of a green infrastructure pipeline possible. These could include a big expansion of electric vehicle charging infrastructures, bus and bike lanes, electricity transmission and distribution systems, water and sanitation service coverage, or making neighborhoods more livable and less energy intensive. So we'll be pushed towards riding our bikes to work. The issue with this then is that it will take time from people to spend time with their kids. It'll make people's lives less efficient. The authors conclude, quote, the response to COVID-19 may not only minimize pain and suffering now, but can also build the foundation for a greener, safer, and more prosperous future. So keep in mind that the companies that are ushering in the green technologies are the same companies that have been the commanding heights of the old energy mediums or industries. An academic think tank at the Center for Global Development wrote in a piece called Never Let a Crisis Go to Waste that the World Bank needs to be the bank for the whole world. Quote, for the first time in history, virtually all people on Earth are faced with the same imminent common threat, writes Jürgen Zattler for the Center for the Global Development blog, Center for Global Development blog. In the midst of an unprecedented global lockdown, there is an intensifying call for an internationally coordinated response. It is in every country's interest to think and act globally. The International Finance Corporation, which is a part of the World Bank Group, will provide long-term loans to finance investments. Quote, generally, the multilateral institutions such as the UN, the World Bank, and the IMF are too siloed from one another, writes Sattler. Unlike in the security sector with the UN Security Council on top, there is no overarching international governance structure that deals with economic risks. So the theme here is that now we have global governance via global institutions, and these need to become more integrated with one another to more efficiently implement global government. Quote, several proposals to strengthen the global economic governance system have been made in the past, particularly in the context of the global financial crisis. These proposals in the past have been long shots, but there might be more modest steps towards strengthening global economic governance, for example, to establish an IPCC-like panel on global risks, with the aim to assess global trends, to identify global threats in time, and to suggest options for collective international action. So this is like a unelected committee sitting at the top of the global institutions, that's the UN, IMF, World Bank, the United Nations, making decisions for the world. Gerd Müller, Germany's Federal Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development, wanted to establish a World Crisis Committee. That's this committee, under the leadership of the UN Secretary General. And the world is always in crisis. Over the 20th century, the world's always been in crisis, whether it be 9/11 or 2008 or the coronavirus. There's a new crisis every 10 years. So this World Crisis Committee will run the world. So Mueller writes that the World Bank has always changed and adapted to new developments. Today, more than ever, we need a bank that lives up to its name. One bank for the whole world. And that is exactly how it must be set up. The bank's business model is based on country programs and demand from member countries. This should not be changed. In the article, Zattler seeks to establish how much and in what manners the coronavirus pandemic will change life on Earth for humans. He points to past cataclysms for evidence of the opportunity for drastic change. Quote, after the 1929 crisis, countries and states began to pump prime growth by Keynesian demand policies, thus injecting equity into their economies. After World War II, a new international order was established with the creation of the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank in order to overcome the policy fragmentation of the 1930s. So, in a way, we've had world government since the end of World War II. His words are echoed in a piece on the World Bank blog. And this is something that we looked at earlier. Quote, if we get it right, the response to COVID-19 may not only minimize pain and suffering now, because we all know that bureaucrats really care about the pain and suffering of people, as if we couldn't implement more humane policies, particularly in the southern hemisphere. And the World Bank, in order to overcome the policy fragmentation of the 1930s. No, I'm sorry, I went backward. As the authors of the World Bank blog wrote, that we can build a greener state for a more prosperous future. Zattler emphasizes, of course, that, quote, we are all in this together, acknowledging that placing economic systems into a sort of hibernation may cause cascading effects on poor countries. So it's like we are now animals. We're like wild animals, and we're going to be forced to go into hibernation now every winter. The economic crisis that arose from the Great Lockdown is leading to remittances falling, depressed commodity prices, record capital outflows, and looming food crises. Thus, greater poverty. As Zattler writes, quote, we need strong multilateral institutions and stronger global governance. How much stronger can it get? I mean, how much stronger can global governance get when you had hundreds of countries implement virtually the same policy across the globe in response to the coronavirus epidemic? Quote, these challenges cannot be adequately addressed by one country. They require a globally coordinated response. Just as the virus knows no border, our responses also should not know borders. I mean, how much do we even need to go any further? I mean, he finishes in conclusion that it's not clear yet how deep the impact of COVID-19 will be on developing countries' economies. But as IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva put it, we should be prepared for the worst-case scenarios. And, I mean, LA County's not opening for 3 months. How long can some of these businesses last without income? Small businesses can't last that long. Our last story, this one's a fun one. Your office in the new normal. In the near future, your daily routine at the office might be drastically changed, starting with a morning self-administered COVID-19 symptom and temperature check. Your boss will receive the results through an app, and if you're cleared, a low occupancy company shuttle will take you to work and everyone on it will be wearing a mask. Before you enter your office, a second health check will be administered by attendants controlling access to doors, elevators, and common areas so as to prevent close contact. Traffic throughout the office might be managed like traffic on a roadway. No more open desk plans, for your desk will be enclosed by a makeshift cubicle made of plexiglass sheets, much like those seen at grocers and gas stations already. What employers have come up with is a mashup of airport security-style entrance protocols and surveillance, combined with precautions already seen at grocery stores, like sneeze guards and partitions. Key cards and sensors, perhaps your smartphone or another device, will monitor social distancing, buzzing to alert you of coworker traffic. A Google Maps of sorts for navigating your way to a coffee machine or the restroom. Lunch will come sealed. Workers will take lunch breaks solo, and there will be no more communal coffee breaks. The workplaces that we left, according to Joanna Daly, are not going to be the workplaces that we go back to. And she's the Vice President of Compensation, Benefits, and HR, Business Development at IBM. Quote, "We are going to have to learn a new way of interacting with each other." Let that sink in. IBM, which supplied the punch cards for the Holocaust according to certain sources, says that we're going to have to learn a new way of interacting with each other. That was not the way we were interacting with each other a few months ago. IBM, Hewlett-Packard, JP Morgan, Citigroup, and Goldman Sachs Group are among the companies redesigning the office space. They're hiring for new jobs such as thermal scanner and elevator attendants and evaluating options for surveilling employees. Thermal scanners will monitor employees for fevers and perhaps wandering thoughts too. I added in that last part as a joke. Have any concerns about the cultural transformation to which you're bearing witness? Maybe the thermal scanner will jot that down too if you're feeling a little heated. Quote, "Tracers will track down anyone who has been in contact with those who test positive for the disease." So imagine that you get a call from the IBM HR department because your friend Johnny, who works there, has a fever. And they're going to ask you to quarantine, essentially, and perhaps they will support your quarantine efforts. Goldman Sachs executives have considered busing and ferrying traders to Lower Manhattan in an effort to avoid public transportation. Wall Street banks, as well as retail and insurance companies, are talking with HealthCheck, a platform that screens employees for COVID-19 symptoms so they know whether to stay home or come into the office. As Ryan Trimberger, the co-founder of Stratum Technology, says, quote, "If you see symptoms coming back, you can have that team broken up into smaller teams or be quarantined." Co-working space provider Convene is working with Eden Health on kiosks for self-serve health screenings, similar to TSA PreCheck for COVID. So it's going to be like when you go to work, you've got like TSA. You're going to have to go through TSA to get to your office. I've got another plane coming overhead. And again, it feels so good to be outside, so sorry if this takes up time. I have a dog here. You can't see her. Come here. Dallas-based architecture firm Corgan is rethinking the office by looking to airports and hospitals with areas for security, hygiene, and crowd control in mind, as well as antimicrobial surfaces found in healthcare settings for office spaces. Now, this makes sense. Like antimicrobial surfaces found in healthcare settings for office spaces. I like that. Like, that doesn't impede on anybody's liberty or freedom. Anyway, moving on. Practices implemented in China, such as one-way walkways, are being considered in the U.S., with IBM considering the use of existing sensors or finding new technology to detect when people are too close together or even walking towards each other. Furniture is being removed from offices, and companies will no longer serve buffet lunches. Mark Cannavaro, owner of Obex PE, is providing hardware and panels to add walls to low-level partitions on shared desks. His orders for the first 3 weeks of April paced those for the entire first quarter of the year. IBM is going to hold a reorientation program to teach us how to act around each other. What's probably going to be running through people's minds is everything else has been disrupted. I just wanted the office to be like it was, said Ken Matos, Director of People Science at Culture Amp, a worker survey and assessment provider. He holds a PhD in industrial and organizational psychology, whatever that is. Quote, give people time to mourn the past because you may not care about it, but they do. This has been goldsilverbitcoin.com's show. And go to goldsilverbitcoin.com. We have a lot of products there. We've got gold Krugerrands and silver rounds, precious metals of all sorts. And silver has not been easy to get. And a lot of the people in the industry expect that it will become easier to get. But I'm not sure how many of them are reading the news. The news is quite scary. As I mentioned, LA County is not reopening until July. I am not sure when the silver supply chain is going to ease up. I don't think the premiums are going to come down. Like already the physical price is divorced from the spot price in the U.S. futures market. A lot of the retail, I know a wholesaler who's waiting for the premiums to come back down. I don't think he's reading the news. I'm not sure if the premiums will come back down, but right now we have silver in stock. So go to goldsilverbitcoin.com and check out our selection. We've been in business since 2012 and we're really doing our best to provide a good service. Thank you so much everyone for watching the news with goldsilverbitcoin.com. Have a great day.